Going ashore. The tide should have been at a low ebb when the boat reached Gargantola, but because of the wind, the level of the water was higher than Pia had ever seen it before. The gale was blowing so hard that it seemed to be holding the surface of the river at an incline. It was as if the water had been mounted into a sloping ram that reached well past the island's banks. Fokir was able to take the boat over the barrier of mangrove roots right into a thicket of tree trunks. Pia noticed that he had not steered the boat to his usual Gargantola landing place. Rather, he had taken it towards the most elevated point on the island, a headland that jutted into the river. When the bow was just short of the tree trunks, Fokir vaulted over the gunwale to pull the boat deeper into the island. He put himself at the front end, where it was easier to maneuver. Pia went to the rear so she could put her whole weight behind the stern. Between the two of them, they were able to push the boat into a position where it was lodged between the trunks of several trees. Then Fokir jumped in again and removed the cover from the boat's rear hold. Pia climbed in too, to look over his shoulder, and saw that the hold and its contents had survived the battering of the wind. Along with Fokir's stove and utensils, there were some nutrition bars and a couple of bottles of water rolling around inside. She stuffed the bars into the pocket of her jeans and handed Fokir one of the bottles of water. Although her throat was parched, she was careful to sip very sparingly from her bottle. There was no telling how long it might have to last. Then Fokir took out the old sari he had once given Pia to use as a pillow. Sheltering the fabric with his body, he twisted it into a rope and gestured to Pia to tie it around her waist. She could not see the point of this, but did it anyway. While she was doing this, Fokir reached into the hold again and took out the coiled line that he used for catching crabs. He handed Pia the nylon roll and motioned to her to handle it carefully because of the sharp edges of the bits of tile and bait that were attached to it. After they had stepped off the boat, he showed her how to pay out the line while keeping the coils sheltered from the wind with her chest. He upturned the boat and ran the line through its timbers and around the trunks of the surrounding trees. Pia's job, she quickly realized, was only to see that the line stayed taut as it was paid out. Any slack was instantly picked up by the wind, which threatened to turn the weights and the bait into vibrating projectiles. In a few minutes, the line became a densely spun web, anchoring the boat to the forest. Yet despite the care he had taken, Fokir had not been able to keep the line's attachments out of his way. By the time he was done, his face and chest were cross-hatched with nicks and cuts. Now he took hold of Pia's arm and led her deeper into the island, crouching low against the wind. They came to a tree that was, for a mangrove, unusually tall and thick-trunked. Fokir gestured to her to climb up, and he followed at her heels as she pulled herself into the branches. When they were about 3 meters off the ground, he chose a sturdy branch and motioned to her to sit astride it, facing the trunk. Then he seated himself behind her, like a pillion rider on a motorcycle, and made a sign to ask her for the rolled-up sari tied around her waist. She saw now what it was for. He was going to use it to tie them both to the tree trunk. She gave him one end of the fabric and helped him pass it around the trunk. After another turn, the sari was all paid out, and Fokir tied its ends into a tight knot. Powerful as it was, the gale had been picking up strength all along. At a certain point, its noise had reached such a volume that its very quality had undergone a change. It sounded no longer like the wind, but like some other element. The usual blowing, sighing, and rustling had turned into a deep, ear-splitting rumble, as if the earth itself had begun to move. The air was now filled with what seemed to be a fog of flying debris, leaves, twigs, branches, dust, and water. This dense concentration of flying objects further reduced the visibility in what was already a gathering darkness. The light was as dim as it might be at the approach of night, but Pia's watch told her it was just 1 in the afternoon. It was difficult to imagine that the wind could grow any stronger or more violent, yet Pia knew it would. In his bare feet, with his body and clothes caked in mud, Kanai scrambled over the embankment and crouched low beneath it to shelter himself from the wind. Drenched as he was, he became aware that the wind had grown colder as it picked up strength. He wrapped his arms around his chest and looked up, shivering, at the sky. Although it had lost all trace of blue, the sky was not uniformly dark. The clouds above were a multiplicity of shades, ranging from an ashen gray to a leaden blue-black. There seemed to be many distinct layers of cloud, each distinguished by a minute difference of shading, each traveling on its own trajectory. It was as though the sky had become a dark-tinted mirror for the waters of the tide country, with their myriad cross-cutting currents, eddies, and whirlpools, all with their slight but still discernible distinctions of coloring. The casuarina trees that lined the embankment were now bent almost double in the wind, and the fronds of the surrounding coconut palms had been twisted into flame-shaped knots. As a result, Kanai was able to look much further into the interior of the island than he might have in other circumstances. The hospital, being one of Lucy Barry's tallest structures, was easy to spot. He started towards the hospital at a run, but after a few steps was forced to slow down because the path was slippery and his bare feet kept sliding on the mud. For much of the distance, he saw no one about. Many of the islanders seemed to have abandoned their dwellings, while others had fortified themselves behind closed doors. But once the compound's gate came into view, Kanai saw that streams of people were heading there in order to take shelter inside the hospital. It was easy to see why, for there was something immensely reassuring about the building's squat solidity. Mostly these people were on foot, but a number were seated on cycle vans, principally the elderly and the very young. Kanai joined the throng, and on stepping into the building's portico, he saw that a full-scale evacuation was underway. Teams of nurses and other volunteers were at work, guiding patients down corridors and helping them climb the stairs that led to the fortified cyclone shelter on the upper floor. At the far end of the ground floor veranda stood the diminutive figure of a small boy. Winding his way through the crowd, Kanai went up to him. "Tutul?" The boy didn't recognize him and made no answer, so Kanai squatted on his heels and said, "Tutul, where's your mother?" Tutul nodded at one of the wards, and just as Kanai was rising to go towards it, Moina came hurrying out, dressed in her white nurse's uniform. She stared at his wet lungi and mud-caked shirt. It was clear she hadn't recognized him. "Moina," said Kanai. "It's me, Kanai." She clapped a hand over her mouth as she took this in. "But what happened to you, Kanai Babu?" "Never mind that, Moina," he said. "Listen, I have to tell you something." She cut him short. "And where are they? My husband and the American?" "That's what I was about to tell you, Moina," he said. "They're at Gargentola. We had to leave them there." "You left them behind?" Her eyes flared in angry indignation. "With the cyclone coming, you left them in the jungle?" "It wasn't my decision, Moina," Kanai said. "It was Horan who decided. He said there was nothing else to be done." "Oh?" The mention of Horan seemed to calm her a little. "But what will they do out there, with no shelter, nothing?" "They'll be all right, Moina," Kanai said. "Fakir will know what to do. Don't worry. Others have survived the storms on that island, his grandfather included." Moina nodded in resignation. "There's nothing to be done now. All we can do is pray." "Horan wanted me to tell you he's going to go back for them as soon as the storm blows over. I'll be going too. He's going to come here to pick me up." "Tell him I want to come too," said Moina, taking hold of Tutul's hand. "Be sure to tell him." I will, said Kanai, with a glance in the direction of the guest house. And now I'd better go and see how Mashima is. Take her upstairs to the guest house, Moina said. I've closed the shutters. You'll be fine up there.